All right. So I want to dive into this subject that might seem a bit silly to cover here, but I do think that there are some philosophical questions that we can ask about sobriety and about the nature of sobriety. And and I mean, I think that it's obviously kind of in line here with the nature of addiction, and sometimes how we think about sobriety is kind of sobriety sometimes often follows periods of overuse or serious kind of addictive tendencies when it comes to whatever kind of substance it may be, narcotics, alcohol, sex, etc. And yeah, last year, the philosophy of alcohol students and myself were lucky enough to actually have a colleague of mine who is a recovering alcoholic, and I mean he is open about this, so I don't feel like it's unfair to kind of mention this. And I had him slated to come in and give a guest lecture during this semester as well to kind of detail his history with alcohol. It was one of the most kind of vulnerable class periods I'd ever experienced. Kind of listening to his addiction and listening to the way that it kind of really did take over his life and kind of his path after kind of through recovery and kind of where he was at now. And it really is too bad that we weren't able to experience that. I don't feel qualified to talk about the nature of alcoholism. I don't feel qualified to talk about the nature of addiction as it relates to um, um, the physiological addictiveness of certain substances, alcohol included. I don't feel qualified to talk about kind of the seriousness, kind of in terms of psychology as it relates to addiction. And so that is one reason why I personally did not choose to offer in a discussion about alcoholism. But as it should be noted, and I mean, we've talked a lot about it in various kind of capacities. Excuse me. But alcoholism should be taken very seriously here in this overall context of our course. And I know that there is a lot of literature out there of anyone struggling with kind of alcohol dependency, struggling with kind of alcohol addiction. And I know that you can find those resources fairly easily online through various community services. And so I encourage, if you're worried about your own alcohol consumption, if you're worried about a family member's or friends, um, there are resources out there to help. And I mean, even if you need to email me and I can kind of like set you up with maybe resources, I'm happy to try to kind of help out and play that role as well. Um, but personally, I just don't feel qualified to dive in to start espousing a lot of facts, to start espousing a lot of ways of thinking about addiction. Of course, I have my own ways of thinking about addiction. Of course, I have my own kind of tendencies as it relates to being wary of addiction. And I mean, for the sake of vulnerability, for the sake of transparency, I do have alcoholism that runs in my family, and that is something that I'm aware of. That is something that I take seriously, and it's something that I'm cautious about, especially because I am passionate about alcohol, both kind of in the consumption aspect. Like, I like drinking, I like consuming alcohol, I like the explorative aspect of alcohol as it relates to wine, as it relates to cocktails, as it relates to beer, and I like the connective. I like the connective aspect of alcohol, the way that you can connect with others through sharing a drink, sharing wine, etc. But I do know that I have a family history that has a proclivative to addictive tendencies there with alcohol. And so one of my own personal rules is that I try never to drink alcohol alone. I enjoy drinking alcohol kind of out and about at restaurants and bars, or if I have friends over, etc. But very rarely, with some exception, very rarely do I ever drink alone in my place of residence. I just feel like that's not a pattern of behavior that I personally want to start. And it takes a little bit of willpower sometimes to make that decision. Um, and I know that some people enjoy drinking alone. Like, it can be fun. You can, get a little buzzed and you start cleaning or you start being productive and playing music and etc. Like, there are maybe beneficial things that are, being creative. Um, but just for the sake of being aware of some of my own family history, being aware of maybe some of those tendencies, it's a decision that I try to maintain and take pretty seriously. Um, And I say all that by way of saying that the conversation of addiction has to be at play here and has to be kind of in the mix. And so, um, if there are issues that need to be talked about, or if you're worried about a friend or a family member or something like that, I mean, there are those avenues by which you can pursue to try to kind of like find that assistance. And so I know that that's a little bit of a strange way to kind of like offer into our discussion of today, but we are going to start talking about sobriety. And again, often when we think about sobriety, there's lots of different kind of levels of perhaps sobriety and the nature of being sober, whatever that may mean. And we'll pick that up in the next video.